All right, let me get the PowerPoint up here. Actually, you know what? Before we do the PowerPoint, does anybody have any questions on anything up till now that we've done over the past few weeks, or anything that you guys want to talk about today? I mean, I'm sure we'll have some time throughout this first part or at the end if you guys want to talk about anything. So if you got anything right now, go ahead and speak up. If not, we'll get rolling. 3, 2, and 1. All right, here we go. All right, so let me share my screen. All right, so today we're going to just walk through everything that we do for on-the-floor coaching. So we're going to walk through our coaching paradigm, the different types of cues which will be built into part of the coaching paradigm, how and when to cue, handling on-the-floor objections, and then walking through the basics of the hinge squat, upper body push, and upper body pull. So walk away with skills for improved floor coaching and interactions, a different way to think about how to create the cues that you need, and then just having a more in-depth look at the progressions and regressions that we use for the big four movements. I know that you guys that are members in the full faction have seen, you know, the videos that we always put out during week one, but we're going to give you a different look at how we do it. So cool. All right. So the first thing we're going to jump in with is the paradigm. And this is really to give structure to the interaction of coaching, and not just necessarily from a social level. Well, I guess it's all social, but like not necessarily like the social relationship, but as much that as the teaching relationship, and how to take the information that you want to convey and get it to the person that you want to get it to. And we just, you know, I started playing with this back in, 2013 or 2014, really put it into action in 2015. And for the past, 4 years, it's really done us a very good service. So the first thing we always do is find the bright spots. We want to make sure that we're giving people the information in a way that's packaged well and tightly, and holds actually a lot of information in a small package. So we want to clearly identify problems and communicate succinctly. We're always going to cue in context, and context means environment with the individual, all of that, and we'll walk through it. And then we're going to dramatically reinforce positive change. So these are the big four pillars of the coaching paradigm. So as we look at this, the first thing we start with is we find the bright spots. So the first thing it's going to do for us is improve client receptiveness. People, we innately, no matter where we are in our lives, no matter what our personality's like, we want to feel seen and we want to feel heard. And we want to be recognized for the positive things that we're doing and for our positive attributes. Everybody wants to have more positive emotion than negative emotion. That's just basic human psychology. So when we start in and we find the bright spots first, we give people the chance to feel as though we are celebrating something good about them. And it opens them up to the, I guess we'll say, potentially critical elements that will be coming afterwards, right? So if we're looking at a lift, we always want to find the bright spots first, because there's always going to be something that was done right. And it's rare that everything in an exercise was wrong. I mean, sometimes that happens, right? So you look at something and it's an absolute train wreck, movement-wise. But if you can't find anything about the movement that was great, you can always reinforce effort, right? So there's always going to be some piece that we can reinforce. We can find that bright spot, right? And beyond that, this is as much for us as it is for the clients, because I think sometimes we get wrapped up in our value and in our identity being able to find a problem, getting locked into hammer and nail syndrome and solve that problem, rather than finding the good things that are going right, because we think, well, we have to fix, we're not really proving our worth, or we're not doing our jobs. And when we do that, our mindset gets shifted to the wrong place. And when we're constantly looking for something just wrong to fix, our clients don't get the best value out of our coaching. So when we do it, the first thing that we want to think about is find that bright spot. I really like how you did X. That was really good. What if we tried blank to take into the critical element of whatever we want to improve? So, for example, you're coaching somebody on a squat. Let's say it's a goblet squat. You know what? I really like how you held your tension with your upper body, but did you feel how you dropped straight down? What if we tried sitting back a little bit? Because that'll put you into the middle of your feet and you'll be able to control the movement better. Right there. That's a phenomenal coaching interaction. And the person is most likely going to be open to your coaching if you've done the steps up to now and followed all of the relationship stuff that we've talked about before coming to this, this week in the coaching stuff, in the coaching curriculum. You'll be in a good place. So whenever we find the bright spots first, it just keeps everything open. It keeps the interaction in a really, really good place. Does anybody have any questions on that? So, and another thing to consider is like, sometimes this shifts, it's really, really important at the beginning of a coaching relationship, a coach-client relationship, to make sure that you're really following this first pillar, especially as you get to know the person, because they don't really know you yet, right? Like if you're hypercritical all the time, or you're jumping in with a critique right away, it starts to put up a wall for them, So it falls in line with the whole let the first rep suck thing that we always talk about. It gives people the chance to put forth effort and potentially not do as well as they could, but they need to feel safe to put forth that effort. And if we're constantly jumping in with corrections right away, that's a problem. But as the interaction goes on, sometimes bright spots become implied, right? And people don't necessarily have to have a bright spot first, although I don't think you'll ever go wrong by doing it. But a lot of times, as the relationship continues on and you guys grow and you guys get to know each other better, you don't necessarily have to jump in with a bright spot, but it never hurts either. So, questions on this? Make sense? Moving on. So the second thing we're going to do is clearly identify. Now, every time I put this slide up, I always ask everybody, what's the first thing you saw? And then inevitably somebody's like, I saw a flower. But really, if you're being honest with yourself, the first thing you see right in the center of the page is a shape of a face, right? Because we are adapted, evolved, whatever words you want to use, to see patterns. And the type of psychology is called that the school of thought that really drove this home is the Gestalt school of psychology from Europe. Basically what it says is we're ingrained to see patterns. Like it's just like why the hero's journey works when we look at stories, right? Because we want to see this happen, and this happened, and this happened, and then here's the resolution. It's why when we walk into a room, we want to figure out the pattern of how we can best move through the room. When we look at faces, we see an actual face, and we don't see a mouth, a nose, and all the constituent parts first. We see the face, and then we have to separate out everything else, right? Or when you're looking, we're evolved to see these things because it's safe for us. So, for example, you want to be able to look at a face and read somebody's emotion, right? That spatial awareness, that ability to see patterns, lets us know whether we're having a good interaction with this person or a negative interaction with this person, whether we should keep talking to them and everything's going well, or if we should put up our guard some way and defend ourselves. We've adapted to be able to see these patterns in animals to know whether we can see a snake in the grass coming for us or if we're safe, right? So patterns are very powerful for us. So it's always good for us to think about that way with our coaching. And whether that's, the way we set up our gym, like we talked about during week 1, so there's an understandable flow and there's a pattern to it, or the way that we look at movement, because we're designed to see patterns. We've evolved to see patterns. So we want to look at the pattern first. So I call that Gestalt to fault. So sitting back and looking at a whole squat, a whole deadlift before we start to find the idiosyncratic things. Because if we start to get too narrow too fast, we start to miss the forest for the trees. And then we start to make bad coaching decisions. We try to focus or overcoach or we make general mistakes, right? So if we focus on seeing the pattern first, then we can start to make corrections. So the best way to do that is to know what you're looking for. And I don't remember if I've ever given you guys this assignment in Strength Faction before, but I always give it to my interns. You know what? I actually haven't given it to my interns yet this summer. I'm gonna have to give it to my interns. Because I a few years back when I was in Connecticut, actually more than a few years back now, I got tasked with building the internship program there. So I had to take all of this stuff that we were doing, and we didn't really have a good system like laid out for like what we did and why we did it. We didn't really have it, quite honestly. I was like, well, I got to build this thing and teach it to these kids so they understand what they're doing and they're getting some value out of this. So I had to think about, okay, so we have to teach them the movements and how they can coach them. Well, do I know exactly what these movements are? And do I know how to coach them? And I did, but I didn't have it articulated in a way that could be shared. So the first thing I did was I sat down and I wrote out definitions for all of the big movements that we coach, the main movements, the ones that were going to be most likely to pop up in someone's program. What was supposed to move? What shouldn't move? What happens when? And in doing that, it helped me see the patterns way faster. And when I could sit back and look at the pattern, then I could go in and make the changes with like making the highest priority decision first, right? So it's like, okay, so if you look at a squat, a lot of people are going to look at the hips and the knees and they're like, oh, well, the knees are caving in. There must be something wrong with the hips. We'll do this. When a lot of times somebody just doesn't have their feet set up in the right place. And you can fix a whole lot of problems by just making sure that you have that correction right. But if we don't start with Gestalt to fault and see the patterns and know exactly what we're looking for, then it makes those changes tougher, and we fiddle around too much with small things when we can go for the big ticket items first. Okay? And we want to communicate succinctly. So we want to take a lot of information and put it into a small package so that people can understand and act on it. Okay? So the guy that you see in this slide here, this is one of my best friends from home. His name is Josh Hall. He was a starting linebacker at Penn State for 2 years. He was the leading tackler his senior year, and he ended up playing the NFL for 4 years. And every offseason when he would come home from the NFL, I would train him. And we've been really tight for a long time, but the thing is when we played football together in high school, we played right beside each other. And there was always this competition about who was going to get to the ball first, like who's going to get the tackle, and just a lot of shit talking and friendly competition. That's great when you're both teenagers and you're having fun, or even as we got into college and we would come home in the summer and we would train together in college. But when you're in a coach kind of client relationship, that doesn't work all that well. And we would start bickering like a bunch of kids, honestly. And it was because I wasn't managing the environment as well as I should have been. And rather than talking shit and just having fun, we would end up getting to the point where Josh would be kind of obstinate and really wouldn't want to do what I wanted him to do. So I was like, well, I got to figure out ways, first of all, to manage this relationship better in this environment. And second of all, get him to do things without me having to say all that much, and communicate a lot in a small package and mostly using the environment. So if you look at this exercise, I really wanted him to learn some core rigidity. I don't have to say a bunch of shit to him. Like, he learns right away. He's holding that bar. It's going to try to pull him over to the right. It's going to try to tilt him. It's going to try to turn him. And he automatically has to resist that. There's nothing that I need to say. I've created an environment that allows for the change. So like we always talk about, we want to let the first rep suck so people have the context of what good versus bad is in this context. You know, let the first rep suck within teaching people to work hard and expound that effort, and that they're safe to do that without somebody being on their ass all the time. That's a whole other thing. But in this area, we want people to be able to gain context between good and bad. So you got to let them go and let them feel what that feels like. The second thing is we want to use as few words as possible, right? So think about everything that's going on in a coach to client interaction. And it depends even on the environment, right? So you have a coach-client interaction. At some level, they want to do things right and they want to please you, all right? So you have all the information coming down from their brain, trying to tell their body how to move. They have all the information going back up, telling them how their body actually is moving, whether they perceive that or not. You know, you have lights. There are people moving in the room. There are things to pay attention to. So there's a lot of information on the processor. So if you throw a bunch more information in the form of words, it makes it even more confusing for them. So we want to use as few words as possible when we're trying to give people information. And that's one of the reasons that, you know, you guys have seen the mantras that we've come up with, and I have one for an example later, is because it takes a lot of information and puts it in a really small package. So we're always only going to work on one or two things at a time. And that's why I talk about like the Gestalt to fault type of coaching. Because if you have that sorted out, you can look at the one big ticket item that often takes care of several other items. But if it doesn't, that's okay. you fix that one thing, let the rest be. The next rep or the next set, you fix the other things and let that be. And that allows you to not give them too much information at once and overwhelm them. And second of all, actually produce something. And because if you jump in with too much at one time, people also start to feel a little bit anxious about how much they're doing wrong. So we want to start in 1 or 2 things at a time, make that change, give them some success, make another change, give them some success, and then you lead them down the path. So for example, let's say someone's doing a rack pull and they maybe have their hips a little too high and they maybe are letting the bar drift from their legs. Okay, fix the biggest ticket item first, which I would say get the bar on their legs, correct that during 1 rep. When they go down to reset for the next rep, correct the hips, right? So that way you're building on each other, you're giving them success, and you're changing the movement without giving them too much information at one time. And by the end of it, you end up with a pretty good looking exercise without overwhelming your clients. So, and like I said, you want to create an environment of change. If you don't have to talk, don't. There are times, and we're going to walk through the 4 different types of cues. There are times when verbal cues are important. There are times when kinesthetic cues or visual cues are important. But if you put people in an environment that automatically teaches them how to move, it works really, really, really well. So for example, if someone is having a hard time with a handcuff hinge on their feet, and you sit there and you try to cue the bejesus out of them, when really they just need an environmental change, like taking them closer to the ground so they could understand how to hip hinge first, then you can actually teach them because the environment will teach them because they're in the right position. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So we want to think about the environment that we're actually in. So are we in a learning environment, which would be like the person is new, being taught an exercise, maybe they're kinesthetically unaware, or maybe you're taking a break from doing a bigger exercise to correct that pattern. That would be a learning environment. In a performance environment, we're doing something to perform. Like this would be your big ticket items, like you're doing a rack pull, you're doing a squat, you're doing a bench press. And understanding the difference between these environments allows us to understand how we're going to use cues in these environments. So in an internal learning environment, internal cues are okay. In a performance environment, we want to stick more towards external cues. So in a learning environment, we want people to make connections and analogies and attachments and understand information. So sometimes people need an internal point of reference to be able to understand where their body is in space. Like somebody that's very new or kinesthetically unaware. If you can teach them the difference between their hips and their spine by drawing attention to them, many times it will clean up the pattern of a hip hinge or a deadlift much more quickly because they just really don't have the point of reference. And sometimes giving them a point of reference, like having them do a glute bridge and having them squeeze their butt and say, hey, do you feel that's your hips? That's your glutes doing that movement. And then flipping them over and having them do a cat cow and saying, hey, do you feel that? How that's your spine? Your spine's moving. And then once they can make those associations between those two parts of their body, it's much easier for them to integrate the movement into a bigger pattern like a hip hinge. So it works very well for that. A performance environment, we don't want people thinking. We want people just to perform. Because if we're using internal cues, we're going to drive people to think too much and try to associate the movement with different parts of their body. And what that does is it pulls them out of their lower brain centers that just allow them to move and up into their higher brain centers where they're thinking. You think, you slow down, you make mistakes, right? So we just want them to move. So an example of an external cue would be like drive the floor away when you're doing a squat or a deadlift. What do you want? You want coordinated hip and knee motion, right? You want them to extend their hips and their knees at the same time. But if you say something like fire your glutes or extend or flex your quads or something like this, it jumbles everything up and it gets confusing and people have to think about what's going on. But push the floor away is very simple and it helps us perform much, much better. But we just have to consider which environment are we in at the time, and we want to cue in that context. So we also want to think about images. One of my favorite things that I used to do when I used to have to teach kids how to sprint is have them imagine a plane taking off. Because one of the things what you want to do when you're cueing, when you're running, when you're taking off for a sprint, is you want to rise gradually. And that's how a plane takes off. It shoots down the runway and starts to rise gradually. If you don't rise gradually, if you try to stay down artificially, you stumble. If you pop up too fast, you're slow. And it's the same thing with sprinting. And that's the connection I used to make. So imagine a plane taking off. Imagine. And you can use this for any number of contexts or situations that you're coaching in. And then you need to match your body language, your tone of voice, everything, the volume of your voice to the situation. So like, for example, if you're coaching somebody on breathing exercises and you're standing over top of them and you're talking a little more loudly than you should, the context doesn't match. So people aren't going to be able to relax the same way. Now, you could say that I take this a little bit too far, but I really don't think I do. Like, it's much easier if everything matches. We want to make things match from every level of context that we can. So we want to match the image, we want to match the environment, and we want to match how we interact with them in that environment as much as we possibly can. Okay? So then we individualize cues. A lot of you know that Chris and I work with a full-time federal tactical law enforcement unit. And these guys are studs, but they do a lot of stuff with firearms, obviously. You know, they're a tactical law enforcement unit. So every year they have to do some kind of requal with their firearms, right? And they have to go back to the basics and demonstrate basic proficiency again. And we often have them do that kind of stuff with their exercise. And so it's tough to take these guys that are studs, that have athletic prowess, that have been training for years, that have literally like gone to war and done crazy stuff, and tell them that we're going to go back to basics with their exercise. They're like, you know, so we have to get buy-in there. So we have to individualize it and take it back to like, hey, you know how every year you got to do your requals? Same kind of thing here. We come back to basics, we make sure the foundations are there, and then we go forward again so you can train even harder. And that's just an example of taking the analogy that you can based on the person or the people that you have in front of you and using that to build a cue. So if you have someone that you know is a tennis player or someone that plays basketball or someone, whatever you know about this person, and you can individualize their understanding and take an analogy that they already have of information they already have and draw it to the information that you're trying to give them, it makes things much, much, much easier. So I've been moving pretty fast. Does anybody have any questions about anything so far? I will go on. Okay, so we have 4 types of cues. So we have verbal cues, which is essentially just using your words, right? We have visual cues, which are demonstrations of what to do and what not to do. So this would be, I really love the way that the guys at MBSC and the CFSC phrase this. They say this, not this, this. So, and we use this all the time at BSP Nova. You do a demonstration of what you want, what it's supposed to look like. You do a demonstration of the mistake that the client is making, and then you do another good demonstration, right? To give them the visual, 2 visuals of what's good, a visual of what they have so they can understand it, and then another, right, 2 visuals, you know what I'm saying? So 2 good visuals, 1 poor visual, so they can conceptualize the mistake that they're making and then also have the information on what to act on. So they have 2 inputs of that. So let's say that your verbal cues aren't working, right? You try a verbal cue, it doesn't work. That's when we can go to a visual demonstration. But many times, there's a lot of folks that if they're not super athletic, a lot of good athletes can look at your movement, have a general understanding, and then mimic it and recreate it. A lot of folks can't do that. So sometimes we need to use some kind of kinesthetic cue or pattern assistance to get that to sink in. So that would be anything where you put your hands on someone and help direct their movement, or using some kind of implement that teaches them how to move. So for example, a very common thing would be putting a pole on someone's back to teach them to keep their back as tight as much as they can. Or putting a band around somebody's legs, some kind of RNT to teach them to, you know, keep their knees in a good position as they squat. So I would say that there's maybe a hierarchy to this of putting someone in the right environment. And if you do that, you have to use fewer of these other types of cues. But I think they all kind of blend. And when you're coaching, you'll put all of them together, but it's good to segment them out for understanding. But I would say the best is putting somebody in the environment that they can handle. And once they're there, the other types of cues are just kind of fine tuning. So you might need to do a kinesthetic cue just to get somebody to understand the tension, or a quick word with context that they already understand, like tall and tight, to get them to recorrect posture, or giving them a quick look at what they were doing. But really the biggest thing we want to do is match the environment to the capabilities of the person that you have in front of you. So what about building a cue? How do we go about doing something like that? So these are the things we have to consider. The big thing is I put it second, but really, what do you want to happen? What is the outcome that you are looking for with this cue? And it seems like like kind of obvious, but I think a lot of times we just start throwing words or phrases or movements at things without thinking about, okay, what is the outcome that we want? And a lot of times it'll happen in person and you just kind of sort it out. But I think if we do a little bit of thinking ahead, we can create cues that really sink in for people in real time. But it takes a little bit of forethought. So we have to think about, what is the environment we're in? Do we need cues for a learning environment and a performance environment? So what's going to happen? Are you trying to get someone to understand their body and space? Or is this something where we're going to go out and try to kick some ass? What is the issue? So what is the exact thing that you're trying to correct? Is it someone being too rigid when they're trying to do something? Is it someone not understanding tension? Is it just someone basically understanding the movement? And then what is the one thing that needs to happen to move this client one step further? And that is what you build the cue around. What needs to happen to move the person further? Okay. So for example, we needed a really succinct and communicable way to teach people to learn the hinge fast during our personal orientation sessions. And I wanted something that was going to imprint it on their brain. So I came up with tall and tight, reach, drive. So we looked at, what's the environment? It's a learning environment and a performance environment. It's kind of a hybrid, right? What's the problem? People don't know how to start, move through, and finish the movement. That's the simple thing. It's like, how do I hold my body? How do I move into the bottom position I need to be into? And how do I get back to the top position? And what needs to happen? I need to get a big amount of information in a small package to a person so that they can understand this movement and then take it forward and have something to repeat to them. So those are the answers to all those questions. So we got tall and tight, reach, drive, TRD, TRD, TRD. Now, something else that I use this for is coaching segmental rolling. So a lot of times people get really rigid and they try to cheat segmental rolling, where we're trying to dissociate the upper body from the lower body and just, flop over and roll, the soft rolling from the FMS. So the environment is still kind of a learning environment, performance environment, hybrid. The problem was people were being too rigid. And what needs to happen? I need to get to people to relax. So I created an analogy. Pretend you're a cooked spaghetti noodle. Everybody's seen a cooked spaghetti noodle. They know what it looks like. It's floppy. It's loose. Pretend you're a cooked spaghetti noodle. Flop over, right? So that's the simple examples of two simple examples of coming up with cues. You just have to think about, what's the environment you're in, answer the questions of those three problems. What's something that someone can attach to take that information and connect to it? And that's really is the simple process for building out cues. Okay. So then we got to take some other things into consideration when we're deciding whether or not we're going to cue. The rule that we have here at BSP Nova when it comes to cueing is we have to think about how many times we are cueing someone. So you get 3 cracks here, 3 cracks at cueing. And if it doesn't stick, and mostly when I say cueing, I'm going to say verbal cueing, because you might make an environmental change after this. But 3 cracks at cueing. Doesn't work, you got to change the exercise or change the position, right? So last summer, our coach Greg, when he was still an intern, asked me, he's like, how do you know, like, what goes through your mind when you make these decisions about when to cue, how to cue, where to cue people, all of that kind of stuff, like what goes through? And this, honestly, this is what came out. At that point, it wasn't a conscious process for me. It was just something that I did. So, but these are the questions that we have to answer. Is it a cognition problem? Is it a thought problem? Do they not understand? Is it position, or is it capacity? So is it cognition? You're trying to verbally cue them, or you're trying to visually cue them, and they can't internalize it, right? So what do? We try other cues that with better analogies or metaphors. We show them a demonstration, or we give them some kind of kinesthetic input. If it doesn't sink in, we have to make a change, right? We have to make a change to the environment. That means either giving them a different implement, putting them in a different position, or changing the exercise altogether, right? So is it position? Is this position right for the person? So that would be an example of the environment. If the position isn't right for the person, there's no amount of cueing, verbal or visual or kinesthetic, that is going to help the person move the way that you want them to. You have to put them in a position that fits for them. You have to change the environment. So let's say you try 2 cues. You try to give them some kind of verbal cue. You try to give them a demonstration. Nothing works. And you know that it's not sinking in. Change the position. That way you put somebody in a position to be successful. Because if the other cues aren't working, we've already made a mistake. And that's what we have to accept. It's our fault that they're in a position that they shouldn't be in. And we have to accept that. So here's our opportunity to change it. And we change the position. An example, very simple. I'll just go back to the hip hinge. So if we have somebody trying to learn a handcuff hinge on their feet and they just can't put it together, and you've tried several demonstrations, you've tried several verbal cues, but if you take them closer to the ground, take them out of gravity, change the environment, and then they can hinge all of a sudden, they just weren't in the right environment for them. So we have to consider that. And then the thing is capacity. Can they achieve the position but devolve from it quickly? So continually cueing the person, they understand it. They understand it. You don't have to keep throwing your words at them. They get it. But they just can't stay there for long enough, right? So a very good example or simple example would be a plank. A lot of people, we're going to start them off with planks. It teaches them position. It teaches them, it builds some core strength and resiliency. But people can't hold it for a long duration. So you have to consider what you're trying to accomplish. If you need them to be able to hold it for a long duration, well, you're going to have to change the position and change the environment to give the person the means to get what you want out of the training. So for example, if you really want to build some resiliency and teach somebody what tall and tight is and hold that for a longer point of time, but they can only hold a plank for 5 minutes on their hands or on their elbows, then you can go to a tall kneeling plank, right? And have them hold a kettlebell and hold tall and tight. And people can hold that for a pretty long damn time. And you can teach them what that feels like. You can teach them to fight to hold it. A lot of good things happen. And you don't have to cue as much. You don't have to say a bunch of stuff, and you can build the capacity. But if someone doesn't have the capacity to hold a position, then you can keep cueing them, but it's just going to be frustrating for both of you because they just don't have the raw materials to be there yet. So you either have to think about, okay, what do you want from the training? If you need that adaptation, you have to make a change to position. Or if you know that they just don't have the capacity to do that yet, and you find out, you have to make a change to the position quickly. And that's where we have to just be willing to make changes and realize, like, okay, so I made a mistake with this person's, with this selection, and I need to make a change right now. Any questions on that stuff? Okie dokie. We move on. So the last part of the paradigm is dramatic reinforcement. So we want to emphatically celebrate success. And we use a concept here called match plus one. So match plus one means you're going to meet the person at like their level of excitement or personality, and then you're going to one step above, so you make an emotional event out of it, right? So if someone's kind of introverted and withdrawn and not super excitable, maybe you just go just one above them. If someone's like way up here, like very gregarious and makes a lot of fuss, you got to go meet them and go one match above, right? You have to make it an event. Now you have to do that within the confines of your personality and being authentic, but we have to make sure that we match people at their level. Because if you have someone that is way down here and you go way up here, a lot of times it's going to be too much for them. Sometimes it won't. Some people just love having a fuss make it over them. They didn't even realize it yet. But a lot of times it's safer just to be like, meet them there, boom, get just a little bit more excited than they are and make a celebration out of it. And if you don't get up here with the other people, it's not going to be an event. Maybe it will be because they're like, oh man, Todd usually doesn't get that excited, so this is an event this time. But usually you got to match them and get a little bit above them. Why do we want to make it an event? Why is dramatic reinforcement so important? Well, it helps people remember, right? So when we make an emotional event out of something, the likelihood that they will be able to repeat the skill that you want them to repeat grows. So people learn better when they have it attached to emotion, right? So we want to create an emotional event. And everything, just like everything else, has to match. Oh shit, too far. Gotta go back. No, okay. Yeah, everything we do has to match, right? We have to make sure that it matches. And it's just like the context of our cues in the environment, whether we're coaching soft rolling or we're coaching somebody to jump really high, everything has to match. And it's the same thing here, okay? So the biggest thing is before I coach, most of the time I ask. Like I say, hey, can I give you a hand? Hey, can we talk about this? Hey, I ask and gain their permission. So it invites you into their world, and they give you, it's not that you're just being directive to them anymore. They're still in the driver's seat because they gave you permission to come in and help them. And that helps so much. And then once you do that, you just follow through the paradigm, right? And there are different, it's not like every time you coach someone, you're just going to walk through one. It's not like step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. These are things that amalgamate to create a coaching process that you will apply in different ways at different times. But these are the tools that you need to have at your disposal. Okay. So, questions on anything so far before we move on? This making changes slide gave me the opportunity to make a music reference and slide David Bowie into this, so I did it pretty excitedly. So the big priorities when we're making changes and handling objections on the floor. The big priorities are safety and relationship, right? We need to put the safety of the person above everything else, and the relationship is just slightly under that. And when we manage those two things and we think about, okay, how do I need to interact with this person and how do I keep them safe? A lot of things take care of themselves. So we have to think about, okay, we're going to make a change. Something's not working for this person, but we have to put them in a better position. Why would people object? There are 3 big reasons that I've noted. They feel like something's being taken away, right? Like no one wants to feel like something's being taken from them. They feel like they aren't involved in the process anymore, like you're being overly directive. Or they feel like they're being made to be lesser. Like, oh, well, I'm not good enough to do this exercise anymore. So they don't want it to be taken away from them. Those are the big things. So I think thinking of those are the problems that we essentially have to solve when people are going to object. Something's being taken away. Realize that, hey, you can deal with that with a very simple statement by saying, hey, we're gonna step away from this for a second. It's not going anywhere. Let's just make sure we have this position and we can work our way back up to it. And making sure that to take care of the involving them in the process part, we lead in with questions. So we start with, hey, how'd that last rep feel? Oftentimes they have some idea that something wasn't right. A lot of people will. Sometimes they won't. And we can talk about how to deal with that. But then we say, yeah, something looked a little off to me. Can I show you what I saw? Give them a demonstration. And then you give them the solution. So that way it's not just critical. It's not like you're just taking something away from them and you're not involving them in the process. We're saying, hey, I want to put you in a better position. Here's an exercise I think. Let's try that right now. And if it doesn't work, we'll find another solution, or you can do this. And if it starts to sink in, we'll go back to the other exercise. And when you handle things that way, people tend to do really well. Another thing, if people tend to have stauncher objections, you really got to step in and make sure that safety is a priority and be like, hey, listen, I have to put you in the best position to be successful. This exercise isn't working right now, so we can't do this. We got to move on. Listen, if anything, it's my fault because I chose this exercise and you weren't actually ready for it. So if anything, this is on me. Let's make this quick change. It doesn't mean it's going away forever. And then let's get back to it, right? And that is the simplest way to take a lot of the information that we just went over. Let's say you make a mistake, you don't put somebody in the right position, follow a process like this, and it's easy to make changes and people will buy in and stick with you. But, if you're doing all the things that we did, previous in this presentation, and then during the first presentation, you're going to nail it. You're going to do pretty well. So, okay. So we're going to start talking about the actual movements now. The big 4, and I'm going to walk you through some of our progressions and regressions. And I'd like to start to make this more of a dialogue coming up here. So I want you guys to ask some questions about this as we walk through it. I just want to make sure that we're familiar with some of these terms. Like, I know they've bounced around the faction. You guys have likely heard them in other places, but I just want to make sure that we're clear on definitions. So progression and regression. A progression would take somebody further up the chain in complexity in movement. Regression would take someone back down the chain and work on fundamental movement skills, right? A lateralization would be an example of an exercise that does just what it says. It moves laterally and still works on the same level, typically still working on fitness, right? So let's say, for example, someone can't full range deadlift, but they can rack pull, right? Because that's where their joints get into a position they can move, blah, blah, blah. That would be a lateralization because we're still working on fitness, right? Or let's say someone's back down the chain, and and they're working on a fundamental part of the pattern, and maybe one drill didn't work, but you try another drill that's along the same lines, that too would be a lateralization because you're still working on the same level. Okay. So progressions take people farther up the chain. Regressions take people back. Lateralizations are just a move in the same place to either continue to work on fitness or to continue to work on part of the fundamental pattern. Okay. So to build out ours, we use the 4x4 matrix. It's something that we talk about a lot. So from what I understand, the lore of this is Dr. Greg Rose was watching Gray Cook work. And like, this is just what Gray Cook did to work. And then Greg Rose put it on paper. And he just came down and was like, well, this is what he's doing. These are the systems that he's following. So this is essentially Gray Cook's clinical mind on paper. Is really what it is. And it's also just, how do we introduce threat to the body? That's all this is. It's a systematic way of looking at like, okay, what can a person do to accept, accumulate, and positively stress the body? Or if we aren't doing that, how do we put them in the position that they can? It's analogous to putting a student in the right classroom, right? So if you take a kid that doesn't have the raw materials for honors English, and then you throw him into honors English, it's tough to expect him to do well. Now, you might have a high expectation of him, and that expectation will definitely pull things out of people for sure, but he's not set up for the best level of success that he could be. And this is what this does for us, right? So if you look at the left side, non-weight bearing, quadruped, kneeling, standing, we introduce more threat by going higher into gravity, right? The more gravity we're in, and the more complexity that our body and our sensory systems have to deal with, the more threat. Now, if we look at the right side, that's loading. The more loading we have, the more threat we have to deal with, right? And for each person, there is a sweet spot for each type of movement that's going to work for them, both from a training and a learning standpoint. And that's what having systems built, progression, regression, and lateralization systems built on the 4x4 matrix does for us. It helps us to figure out, where does this person need to learn and where can this person train? Those are the two questions that it answers, okay? Now, here is our streamlined process for teaching somebody how to hinge when they come in on day one at our gym, okay? This after they do their consultation with Chris or I, they do their FMS, and then on day two, they do this. This is where we start to teach them to hinge. So typically, we're going to start in one of two places, depending on what the outcome of their FMS kind of looks like. We're either going to start with a standing handcuff hinge and see how they can hinge, or I'm going to take them right to the kettlebell deadlift, right? And then if either of those don't work out, or if one's too easy, we can progress or regress based on whatever that looks like. The great thing about this system, or this streamlined process, is that I can teach someone everything I want them to know literally with one implement. I can use one kettlebell for this whole process, maybe two if you want to use heavier, but you don't have to do a bunch of moving around. You don't have to do anything like that. We start with a tall kneeling handcuff hinge. We fold ourselves in half. Looks good. Standing handcuff hinge, belly swing. So what does this do? It really, all this does is it's taking the environment and adding complexity to it, right? So if you look at the tall kneeling handcuff hinge, we're close to the ground and we have the handcuff, the kettlebell behind our butt. So what's that do? It gives us a place to aim at, and it also teaches us a way to stay tall and tight, right? Because the kettlebell wants to pull you into extension, so you have to learn how to get into that tall and tight position and hold it, right? Then we add complexity by doing the standing handcuff hinge. So we add more joints to the equation, and we get higher into gravity, and we see if they can deal with it. Then from there, we go to the belly swing, which Dan John calls the Bulgarian goat belly bag swing or some shit like that. All right, so we've taken the load. We've essentially taken their teddy bear away, right? They don't have their safety blanket of having the kettlebell behind them and knowing where to put their hips anymore. They don't have it. They have to learn how to do that on their own now. Find the middle of their feet, find their balance, and understand where to hinge. Now, then we also take the load and put it on the front of their body, but with a very short lever arm. So they can start to learn how to create tension with the load on the front of their body, load the front of their body, and do it in a safer environment. Then we can go to the kettlebell RDL. We just drop it down. It just takes you to, it just adds complexity to the environment. Now we have to manage more stress and more tension. And then when they look at there, we learn how to pick the kettlebell up off of the ground, right? That's really the process. So like I said, I try to start people off with either kettlebell deadlift if I really think they're going to be able to. And if that doesn't work, I'll go to the standing handcuff hinge and start to work back up from there. But some people you can just start, and you're not wrong to start somebody at the beginning and walk them through this. You just want to get them as far as you can into this process, right? Does that raise any questions for anyone? Cool. Now, let's say that some of the stuff isn't working, right? So we have to have other options. And this is based on all 4 of the positions. So if you look at the ones that are highlighted, that's the biggest exercises that we use to teach these things, right? That we start to work on fitness. Now, if you look on the ground, maybe you need to take somebody back down to the ground and work on the fundamental pattern of their hips, right? I mean, that's where your leg lowering variations come in. That's where all of that comes in. Maybe you need to give someone awareness with a bridge or a Cook hip lift. The segmental cat-cow, why is that in there? It teaches people where their spine is in space. Like I said, sometimes in the learning environment, we have to give people the information so that they have points of reference in their body. You need to learn where your spine is sometimes to be able to segment it from your hips. And bird dogs, they just teach us to extend our hips in a different environment, right? And there's a concept called motor redundancy, which essentially means the more ways that you have to get the same job done, the better. And having the ability to extend our hips and flex our hips and do all these things in different positions helps to build that resiliency and that motor redundancy. So that's why bird dogs are there, even though they're not necessarily a direct representation of a hinge. And then from there, we got our tall kneeling stuff, right? Plank, just holding a kettlebell and understand how to stay tight. Handcuff hinge, and that's where we start to move, right? And then we got our patterning. So I know my buddies at the CFFC might disagree with me, but I leave it in there just in case. I never want to take a tool completely away in case there is an environment that works really well with. But I fucking hate the butt to wall with the pole thing. I hate hinging with a pole because I think it's just like it's too easy to butcher. That's why we go right to the handcuff hinge, right? It solves so many problems at once. It teaches somebody how to put themselves in the right position. It teaches them where to push their hips. It teaches them how to balance the middle of their feet. It does all of that with one thing, right? And it just helps a ton to just simplify it. But I don't like to take it out of there just for sure. And then if you look at it, there's our the fitness. You look right there through the progression that we do to be able to, as we progress people through the deadlift. You got to do the kettlebell deadlift, right? Once you can do that with the 60 kilogram for 8 good reps, 2 sets of 8, then you get to move on to barbell RDLs. Then we rack pull, then we hex bar deadlift. And somewhere in there, we start swinging. And then if people have the raw materials from a joint standpoint, we'll conventional or sumo deadlift. And that's how we walk people through it. So as we look at cueing, here's verbal, visual, and kinesthetic. Our mantra, tall and tight, reach, drive. Okay. The other thing that we want to think about is putting people in the middle of feet and teaching them to dial, right? We want to stay balanced in the middle of our feet when we deadlift. And when we do really any kind of lifting movement on our feet. A lot of folks will tell you to push through your heels. I sincerely think it's a bad idea because I think it starts to create a balance problem. And if you create a balance problem, your body's going to solve the balance problem before it solves the force problem. But if we put people in the middle of our feet by dialing, having them find their big toe, their pinky toe, and their heel, and then screwing their knees out, they get locked into the middle of their feet. So we want to break the bar or pull it in, whatever implement, pull it in. If we have a kettlebell between our legs, we're going to snap the handle. If we have a bar in front of us, we're going to pull the bar into our legs. We're going to drive the floor away. If we're doing a sumo deadlift, we're going to have to spread too. And then we use our positional cues. Help people find where they need to start and finish with tall and tight. If they're too macho man, you let them know. If they're too sad dog, you let them know that. And then the visual is the same thing that we've always talked about. Any solid demo of what they're doing or not, or what they're doing right, or what we need them to do, or what they're doing that's not working. And that's the this, not this process. Then kinesthetic is just giving somebody the idea, another way to give people a point of reference. The deadlift RNT, which if you guys haven't seen, that's the one where you put the bar through the PVC pipe, put the PVC pipe through a band, have the band anchored to a squat rack, and make them keep it on their legs so they understand lat tension. The Dan John leg pull, you have somebody hold on to something, you pull their legs so they understand what hamstring tension feels like. Anything that's going to give them information from a kinesthetic input standpoint. Questions on any of this stuff? Okay. So let's look at upper body pushing. The biggest thing is the relationship of the hands to the body. That teaches us where our angles need to be. So the biggest mistake that people make with push-ups is they put their hands directly underneath their shoulders. We can't put our hands directly underneath our shoulders because then our shoulder blades won't wrap around our rib cage the way that we need them to, okay? So we're going to put our hands directly under our shoulders, then we're going to pull ourselves an inch forward. That will set us up so at the bottom, our elbows will be right around 90 degrees. And at that position, it allows our shoulder blades to wrap around our rib cage, right? And that's the biggest thing. We have that, and we have our elbows at a 45-degree angle. That's every horizontal press. That's it. That's every horizontal press, but we build it with a basic push-up. So for us, this is what it looks like. Very simple. We don't do a ton of this shit. On the ground, we're going to do our dumbbell, kettlebell floor presses or bench press variations. Typically, we want to see you do 2 sets of 8 good push-ups with the bar at mid-shin before we do any kind of bench press variations or before we try to do push-ups from the floor. We will use dumbbells and stuff because they help people build some strength, like dumbbell pressing variations, whether inclined or just flat, before we do that. But we're not going to put a bar in anybody's hands. We do a lot of landmine pressing, both from the half kneeling position and from the standing position, which I forgot to add. And rarely will we have people do barbell overhead press. But this is really it. But the biggest thing is teaching people to find those angles. Your elbows are 45-degree angle to your body, and you're always getting yourself to the position where your elbows are just around 90 degrees or slightly less at the bottom. And teaching them the basic push-up by setting up, pull yourself an inch forward, pull your nose to the ground, is the simplest way to do that. Questions on the pressing stuff so far? Okay. The cues: tall and tight, pull, drive. That's pretty much for every press. Tall and tight, except for the bench press, okay? Because the bench press is the one where a lot of rules get broken. Now, we don't have our folks arch like the lady is in this video, but you're not going to necessarily stay tall and tight when you're bench pressing. You're going to break the bar. You're going to pull your chest up to it. You're going to pull the bar down to you and drive yourself away from the bar. So you're going to go into a little bit of extension because we need to create a stable platform. Because if we're flat, the platform's not going to be stable. It's not like we're doing an open chain or a closed chain movement like a push-up where you can draw stability from the ground. We have to draw stability from our upper body as it relates to the bench. So we can't just be flat there. So we need to push our chest up. We need to pull the bar down to us and bring our chest up to meet it, and then drive ourselves away from the bar to keep our chest up, okay? But as far as everything else goes, tall and tight, pull, drive. Pull yourself down. You want to pull your nose to the ground, drive yourself away from the floor. So when we squat, we have a streamlined process for that too on day one. We do the ISO hold to learn positioning. We do a plate squat to learn how to counterbalance and how to reach with the movement. And then we start to work on fitness as fast as we can, okay? So the ISO hold, what does that do for us? So here's how we do it, and that'll help explain. It helps us find the bottom position for someone and what the bottom position should feel like. Now, depending on what implement you're using, the bottom position will change for people, but the bottom position should always kind of feel the same, like you have control and you can spread the floor. So what we do is we have folks drop into the deepest squat position that they can, okay? And then from there, we have them slowly rise up and have them spread the floor. And we say there's going to be a position where you feel like you can spread really, really hard. As soon as you find that position, hang out there and spread hard. And it gets them that understanding of what the bottom is going to feel like. Then from there, we can take them and either goblet squat them if they have experience, or we can go to a plate squat. In the plate squat, they're going to squat, they're going to reach and spread and drive as they reach the plate out, and then they're going to stand up and bring the plate back in. And they're going to do that, and it teaches them how to counterbalance their hips and keep their weight centered in the middle of their feet as they squat. Okay? And it's that simple. The squat is much simpler to teach. It seems to be a lot more intuitive for a lot of people. And then from there, we progress them how we could. You know, our squat standard is being able to do the 24 kilogram, the 24 kilogram for 2 sets of 8 good reps. And these are the squats that we use right here. Now, if someone's maybe a little heavier or doesn't have the stability, we'll do a band or TRX assisted and hold on to a TRX, or we'll loop a band around their back and under their armpits to help them learn the pattern and take some of the eccentric stress away. But mostly it's the iso hold, the plate squat, goblet squat, and then we Zercher or safety bar squat. We don't do a lot of front squatting with other people. We don't do a lot of back squatting. We don't really find the need to for what we're trying to accomplish. So it's really, that's it. Like we just hammer and hammer and hammer those squats, and we change the loading parameters. And it works really well. And the biggest thing is when you look at the cueing, is a squat is a squat is a squat is a squat, unless you're box squatting, then it changes. But for everything, we have our mantra, which is reach, spread, drive. You're going to reach back slightly. So a lot of folks will tell you that you just got to drop straight down when you squat. You don't have to do that slight reach back. If you've ever taught someone that's not really in tune with their body, or is just learning how to move, or even people that have just never lifted before, to drop straight down with a squat, watch what happens. Nothing good. People need to learn to push back to center their weight over the middle of their feet a little bit more. So it takes care of that problem. So we have people reach, we have people spread, we have people drive. Reach and spread, spread and drive. Reach and spread gets you into the bottom position. When we say spread, we mean spread the floor. Spread and drive gets you into the top position. We want to break the implement, whatever we're using. So let's say we have a safety belt on our back. We have the two yokes going over. We're going to try to break it around our head. If we have we're back squatting, we're just going to break the bar and get that lat tension. If we have a goblet squat, we're trying to break the implement by ripping it in half. We're going to drive into the implement. This is going to keep our hips underneath the bar. One of the biggest things, keep our hips needed where they're going to provide the most leverage. Not having the upper body tension and not having ourselves locked into the implement, those are the big issues with squatting that people make mistakes with, right? So we want to drive into the implement, and that'll keep our hips underneath us where we need to be, rather than doing some kind of good morning squat type of hybrid. Okay. And we already talked about this. Any proprioceptive input with the squat. So with upper body pulling, for us, it always starts with the inverted row. And this is just an inverse push-up. We go to the same position. Your hands and your angle should be the same. You should be pulling to that same position that we have with the push-up, with our elbows about 90 degrees. They're slightly less. And we should stay in a plank the whole time. That's really all it is. That's where we start. So every row is essentially the same. A row is a row is a row is a row. We're going to have the same angles, the same elbow angles, the same hand angles, everything. And if we can learn to do that with a simple inverted row, it carries over to everything else that we're going to do. It teaches all the angles for everything else. So for us, we have the inverted row, which we technically on the ground. Our strength standard for that is 2 sets of 8 with your body at a 30-degree angle. And then that opens you up to start to work on vertical pulling. If your shoulder mobility screen is clear enough to do that. Then from there, we hammer pretty much the same variations all the time. Single dumbbell row variations, half or tall kneeling, and then bent over row. We have our vertical pulling progression, which is our level 1, 2, and 3 chin-ups, which you guys have seen through some of the programming, and then pull-up variations. But that's really it. And the biggest thing is just getting somebody right away on day one into the best position as we can with the inverted row. And that's in a good plank with your heels up, and pulling to that same position that we did with our push-up. And typically, the best place to get somebody to set up to do that is to have the TRX or the Jungle Gym or the rings or whatever you're using set up with the bottom of it set up just right at the person's hip, the top of the person's hip. And that'll usually set them up with a good angle, and you can walk them in or out from there. Tall and tight, pull and control. The biggest thing is, not the biggest thing, but one of the big mistakes that people make is they lower the weight too fast when they're rowing, and they just rush through it and they lose control. So we want to get tall and tight, we want to pull, and we want to control on the way down. And those are the big things with rowing that we see. Questions, comments, concerns on pulling? Okay, so here are the action steps, and then I'll turn this off and we can chat. So I want you to pick one pillar of the paradigm and practice it this week, whether it's find the bright spots, whether it's communicating succinctly, cueing in context, or reinforcing dramatic change. Pick one and make that your goal for this week to really get better at that. Pick one of the 4 big movements and practice the progressions, regressions, and lateralizations. Work through all of them. And if you need help, post in the group or hit me up personally, and I will help you work through them. And I want you to take the process that I laid out for building a cue and use one of the movements from the progression, regression, lateralization system that you choose and build a cue out for that movement. And that's what we'll work on this week. All right. What questions do we have on any of that or anything up to this point? Nothing? Bueller?
Trying to look over my notes from the last one. I got caught up on last week's yesterday.
Okay.
So I got after some of the action steps and created a little online questionnaire that I sent it out to a few clients. So
oh, awesome.
Looking to hear back on those. So I appreciate that.
Very cool. Yeah, man. Absolutely. Strupe?
I want to say that you look really handsome today, Tom.
Thank you. Thanks. You know, I'm jet lagged, you know, so for you to say something like that on a day like this, that is just, you are all right.
You nailed it.
You are all right.
Maybe a small question,
Sure.
and we kind of just went over that, but what are your thoughts on clients who have a difficult time like communicating or, you know, let's say from a push-up position, you tell them, you know, to push the floor away. What do you think about like people that have a hard time like understanding that, or their feedback is that's stupid, I don't understand it, that kind of stuff?
I would ask them a question. Okay, so what is it about that you don't understand? That's where I would go to. It's like, what doesn't sink in there? Or what do you think would help you understand this better? Or I would go right to a question. If they say it's stupid, I would be like, well, what do you think? I would literally, why is it stupid? What do you think is stupid about it? I mean, I would just go to like, look, I want you to get this. I'm here to help you get this. I want to work through this in the way that you're going to understand it. So if that's not working for you, I would like to find the way that it will. And let's work on that. That's how I would handle situations like that, because that way it just, everybody seems like they're on the same team and it just kind of diffuses things, unless they, you know, that way, because then sometimes people just want to push you and see if they can pick a little bit, because people are people and we do silly things like that. And then that completely diffuses their ability to pick at you, because it's like, you're just there in the spirit of cooperation. Is that what you've done in the past? Is that kind of how you handle it?
Yeah, sometimes it gets difficult, you know.
It does.
It's like, oh God, what do you not get about this? This is like simple, but you know, you got to remember that it's not you, it's somebody else. So.
Yeah. And it's just, we have years of experience in a whole lot of different contexts. And a lot of us are better athletes than the people that we train. And, you know, we can watch something and we're just able to replicate it. And a lot of people aren't like that. And,
right.
And that's where one of the things where the environmental change that will make someone feel successful works a lot before they get frustrated. And it's just like running through that CPC, cognition, position, capacity, as fast as you can, and being like, okay, well, this just isn't going to work. Let's put them in the environment that will, so they feel some level of success, and then you can take them back, you know?
Right.
And that's like, that's it. It used to feel cheesy when I first started trying to do it, but the dramatic reinforcement stuff really works. Like, you get them success and then you're like, bam, right on top of it. And then that sticks, and then you can usually build on it a lot faster.
Right. I try to time out my high fives a lot in my sessions. So
there you go. There you go. I got a lot. Actually, I wasn't there to coach the strength camp on last Friday because I was in Vancouver, and one of the guys was like, hey, I got a bone to pick with Greg. There was no dancing. There was no singing. And I only got one high five, and that's when I was leaving. You know what I mean? It's like, that is unacceptable. Unacceptable. So, yeah, man. Timing out the high fives is a good idea.
And there's no shortage of dancing here at the gym. So.
Got to dance. I believe that. You can move, though. I just bounce like a toddler. It's a totally different thing.
Hey, what was that? What was your spaghetti noodle reference?
Yeah,
Same
spaghetti.
thing. Same thing.
Oh, well, there you go. That'll help me today. I'm going to loosen up. Awesome. What other questions we got, guys?
What do you guys have on your initial like intake assessment as far as like goals? Do you have them go ahead and think about 1 year long-term goal?
Yeah,
And
we absolutely
down
do.
from there? Okay.
It doesn't break it down in like the end of block meeting form does, but it asks them what their goals are, and it asks them, to sow that statement so they can start to get it out, and it gives us an initial direction. The thing is just oftentimes people can't articulate it that clearly, or it's very surface level. So that's why we use all of the other stuff to build the skills that takes them down the line. But yeah, we do it all online now. I'm trying to see if we still have any print versions over here. And I don't think that we do. Oh wait, hold on. I got one right here that's been already printed out. I'm not gonna show you. I'm trying to find it so I can show you without showing you. Okay. So essentially, we'd ask them in a different way on this. We don't ask just straight at goals because that's also tougher for the person. So the question that we ask on the intake form is, if we were meeting 1 year from today and you were to look back over the last year to today, what has to have happened during that period for you to feel happy about your progress? Feel free to write a book here. The more detailed, the better. And then from there, it says, if we could figure this out, what value will this bring to your life? What doors will it open? How will your life be better? So that's essentially your so that statement or your why statement. And then we ask the how will we know this is working question, just like we do on all of our other forms. So that's how we handle goals up front. So it gives them, it's almost more of a visioning activity than it is like a direct, like this is my direct goal kind of thing.
Yeah. Kind of like the magic wand question.
It is. It's the same.
Gets them to say what they want, and those are kind of like what their goals are.
It's the same question, and then you help them excavate it from there. You build the skill early on of like with the gab and giving yourself direction and a short-term direction, and then being able to build process off of that, and then you just keep asking them that question, and you can excavate it. Like I talked about. I don't know if I talked about it on the call last week. I think I did, but I was in an end of block meeting with a lady a couple weeks ago. She's like, I don't know how to do these levels. I don't know what to do about it. And I went back to the magic wand question. I asked her in person, and she like answered it. And it was like, well, there's your levels. Do you see? And then I had her write them out, and she was like, oh. So sometimes it just takes a little bit different of a context to get it out for people, but asking them in a couple different ways is usually the answer. But yeah, that's how we handle it from up front. So,
because with that form that I made up for my clients, I have them, rate the following on a scale of 1 to 10 on muscle strength, weight, fat loss, all that whole stuff.
Sure.
And then I have the long-term goal, the magical wand question in there, some favorite exercises, and then exercises you don't like to do or would rather not see in your program.
Perfect. I mean, I can walk you right back through ours if you want. I mean, we got all of our Park Hugh stuff up front. And then from there, we go into, we ask them if they've trained before. And then what have you been doing most recently? Likes or dislikes? Scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about pain, discomfort? 1 equals I stop at the first sign of anything that feels off. 10 equals no pain, no gain. So we understand how to have that conversation with people. And then ask them to expand on it. And then we go through all of the what's important to you questions. And then into the goal questions. And then at the end, we ask the how would your best friend describe you question. And then that's where we end.
Cool. Thanks.
Yep, no problem, man. What else, ladies and gents? Any other questions, comments, concerns? Anything you want to fight about? I'm looking at you, Victor. I'm just joking. That's a joke.
I was always, but I mean, this,
you live in New York, of course you do.
Like always, of course, looking at just for like staring.
No, okay. So let's do this. When you guys pick one of your action items, whatever you're picking for this week, if you're going to do all 3 or you're going to do 1, do me a favor and just and post them in the group in the 4 weeks to clear and effective coaching group, so we can all kind of check them and chime in on it and have a conversation about them. Cool. Really appreciate it if you guys would do that.
Cool.
Word.
Word.
All right. Well, if you guys have nothing else, we'll call it a day, and I'll have the recording up as soon as I can, and then the recap and everything too.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Todd.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.